Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this episode of Pro Performance. Today we have some incredible guests that will be sharing tips on how to protect your pipeline. I am your host, Craig Pochert. I'm the crew director for Crew 3, or the Right Stuff crew. I'm a 16-year veteran with Rocket, and I'm joined here with Sean and Aram. So, gentlemen, please introduce yourselves.
Thank you so much, Craig. Happy to be here. Yeah, we're Forever American Mortgage. Ram and I have been in the industry collectively pushing 25, 30 years and actually got our start at Rocket on the retail side. So that was our foundation and our roots. And about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we branched into the world of wholesale and haven't looked back since. So Rocket has been with us our entire career, and now on the wholesale side are able to offer competitive pricing, more options, and started our company coming up on 4 years. So we're on the consumer direct side of the mortgage space. A lot of focus on refinance business, and happy to be here.
Excellent. Happy to have you. Aram?
Yeah, like Sean mentioned, we've been in the industry collectively over, I would say, 25 years. I spent the better part of a decade at Rocket. As a senior director, you name it, I was on that side of things, trying to climb the corporate ladder before we had kind of a meeting of the mind, Sean and I, and decided to venture off on the wholesale side of things. And now we're here 5 years later, still learning every day. One of the cool things that we get to say is that we still work with Rocket. So
Right.
That's been a seamless part of our branding. We always believed in the Rocket product. I always give my kudos to my leadership capabilities and things that I've gotten better at because of what I was trained and learned at Rocket Mortgage. So we owe a lot to Rocket, and we continue to, champion you guys on this side of the world.
Awesome. It's great to see success stories of people that were with Rocket that went out and no risk, no reward, started something new for themselves and to see that grow. And 4 years, that's no joke. You definitely saw some ups and downs in the market, and it's going to be great to learn from you guys today. To anchor the why behind today's event, here's a look at the partner promise this discussion is going to support. So as you can see here, all of our partner promises are up on the screen. At Rocket, we're guided by our 10 partner principles, real practical commitments to your independence, growth, and transparency that you guys deserve. And these aren't just words. Whether you're a current partner or a potential new add to our companies and our the wholesale side with us, these promises are how we show up as an ally to the broker community. Today's session is going to focus on partner promise number 7, which is human expertise at the speed of AI. And what the point of this is really is brokers move faster and create a better client experience when operational workflows and proactive, connected, and designed to reduce friction across the entire process. So by the end of this session, our goal for you today is to learn how to identify common pipeline risks and break down points in the loan process, explain how communication gaps and workflow issues impact real outcomes, apply those strategies to reduce operational friction and last-minute surprises, and build cleaner workflows that protect the client experience and your pipeline. So guys, let's dive right in. What are the most common reasons a loan can experience delays or fallout in today's market?
Yeah, good question, Craig. I think it's important to first kind of categorize the two areas of the business where breakdowns occur. And I think of it's more of like an internal and an external. Internal is really kind of the nuts and bolts of the loan application itself, from missing information on your 1003 to tight ratios, whether it's income or loan to value. And then the external side is more communication based, which typically falls apart just from not setting proper expectations. So I think where to be most effective on trying to figure out how to prevent deals from breaking down, you just kind of first got to isolate where deals break down to begin. And we can go more into specifically kind of things to look out for or how to set expectations to prevent the internal and the external from happening.
Excellent. Well, let's dig a little bit deeper on that then. How is this actually showing up in the communication across the people that are involved?
Aram?
Yeah, sure. Typically, what you'll see, there's communication gaps that show across borrowers, agents, lending partners, maybe overpromising early without setting proper expectations of what this may look like. Lack of transparency around certain issues that may cause delays. This is understanding your client profile, whether it's loan to value, debt to income, FICO score, things that you can see up front that can become an issue later. Not providing some transparency around it, and just explaining to your client, hey, this may look like this, and this is the possible outcome. And just misalignment on timelines in general, especially when delays are outside of your control. Those things have to be communicated quickly. And one thing I like to say is whether it's good or bad news, you just got to communicate with your clients and making sure they're completely aware at whatever their knowledge base is, to ensure that you don't miss something there because you just didn't give them an idea of what's going on. And this can really lead to clients or partners or whoever it is being surprised when issues surface late because you didn't do that piece of communicating up front.
That's so true. And it's, as much as we can prepare up front, whether it's on the loan officer side as they're taking the applications and getting that loan into process, or on our side, once it's in underwriting, there's so many pieces that are somewhat beyond our control, whether it's the appraisal timelines, title getting back to us, or any other third party items that are being worked on. Sometimes you just have to be able to be nimble and think on your feet and come up with solutions on the fly.
Yep.
So when those gaps do exist, why do they tend to snowball into a bigger problem?
I think you just had foreshadowed it, right? It's certain things are outside of our control as loan originators. And I think a good mentality is that we're the quarterback of the transaction, but we don't control every part of the transaction. So what's, I guess, a blessing and a curse is an ecosystem like Rocket. There's a lot of support for third-party services to get complete, but there's turn times that we just don't have any control over. And I go back to maybe a common theme that I'll communicate to my team, and it's this kind of mentality of measure twice, cut once. Sometimes by the time you recognize there is a problem, you're already 2 weeks into process. The train's already left the station, and something that maybe could have been prevented up front with a long turnaround time now gets put into your purview, and you're saying, well, hold up, like, it's going to take how long to get this, a condo questionnaire complete, or this verification of employment? So I guess full circle, this mentality that we have on our team is just kind of having this due diligence prior to even getting the loan into underwriting, and trying to kind of put ourselves at the finish line and working backwards. There's a lot of the times you can submit files into underwriting and not have all the necessary documentation that you'll eventually need. But I would implore the group to try to go the extra mile and try to be super proactive on getting stuff up front that is going to be coming up, just because it's going to reduce friction and save a lot of time for things snowballing and becoming bigger issues. And examples of that, the client's got a HOA. You might not need that HOA statement to get conditional approval. However, getting that early guarantees you have the contact information. It's one less condition, and it's just being more proactive in kind of that backwards to forwards mindset of just kind of putting yourself at the finish line, saying, what is everything we need to get this file complete? And what can I get up front to prevent this from even becoming an issue down the road?
Excellent. And I really think, we've already discussed what experience brings, right? We've got partners all across the country. The range of experience of the folks that I deal with is, I would say on average, is probably 20 years in the business. So it's that repetitiveness and seeing the things that just happen in the loans. You might have the most clean file on the planet, but something like an HOA, or God forbid, you're in New York and you're waiting on something to come through from an attorney. You don't have no idea how long those things could hold things up. And if you're planning on closing on Friday and we don't have that stuff in, that creates an issue for everyone. So if that's the pattern, what really separates the brokers who stay ahead of it, as opposed to those who are kind of on their heels and constantly reacting to issues?
I would say a component here, you just said that you deal with people that 20 years in the industry. Well, like internally, we have varying degrees of experience. So the experience really comes from like Sean and I, and building a mental log and resources of past scenarios and solutions and how we got by those. I can think of one recently where it was a Tesla UCC lien, and you can't just call them. And I found out, walked my client through, went online. She went online, and then there's a component there where they can request a release, but it has to be done online in their account. And that happened, and then within 3 weeks, I had someone else. I'm like, hey, we can't figure this out, and I was like, oh, funny enough, we just did this. You go online, you push this button, cost $100, and you'll get it with, it says 3 business days. Ours came in within a couple of hours, and now we have that resource and that log. And all of a sudden, not only do I have that data point, but someone else on the floor does. We come from an environment where everyone's sharing existing maybe issues, solutions, things of that sort. So everyone's kind of bringing each other up to speed when it comes to a knowledge base, just by being, I like to call it, in the trenches of the business, right? Me and Sean are still originating loans. We're still understanding day-to-day changes, whether it's guidelines and things of that sort. One other piece is just setting realistic expectations to avoid the surprises. And that comes with, Sean mentioned the HOA statement. Those are real scenarios where, hey, if you don't set this expectation up front right now, whether it's a condo questionnaire or what we may need, then the surprise comes later, and then that's what causes a detrimental issue with your client experience or a partner experience. And that's the stuff that requires a little bit of a proactive nature. Reactive is having solutions for problems that may surface. Internally, we may have a cheat sheet, whether it's to solve a DTI that just went over a threshold. Have you looked at HOI changes? Have you looked at small debts that can be paid off? And we have this cheat sheet as a log to see if we can get something done. And that's on the reactive side of things, because maybe we didn't get the full amount of income because things came a little light once it was underwritten. Like, hey, what's the backup there? And then those are addressing those issues and under real-time pressure situations to make sure you're actually reacting with the sense of urgency to get them knocked out, and then reworking deals instead of just chalking it up as, man, this is not going to close. So now we're trying to rework things together, and those are on the reactive side of things. I don't know, Sean, if you want to add a couple tidbits there, but those are some examples that I have.
Yeah. Maybe it's a state of mind too, just kind of how like you approach your business. Are you a person that's kind of organized or kind of in a bar fight? And I think to your point, Aram, we try to go into most with plan A as the front runner, but there's scenarios where we know plan A might be a 50-50, right? Maybe values are tight. There's not a bunch of comps. Maybe income's tight. So we typically try to have kind of a plan B in place. And again, back to communication, I think that most problems can be solved with a good foreshadow. And I think that it's probably common that people brand this whole kind of under promise and over deliver, but I would challenge the people to make sure they actually live that. Because I often see a lot of over promise and then you got to kind of walk backwards, and it's just awkward for all parties involved. So we always go with the intent of like, hey, the game plan is this loan structure. However, here's some of our concerns. And we just try to point out potential pain points that could be a problem in underwriting, just so we can have that dialogue. And let's say the appraisal does come in different than we expected. That call is so much easier to make with the consumer of just like, hey, unfortunately, the value did come in different than we were expecting. However, we did have a game plan in place, and here's this plan B that still does accomplish the goals that we set out. So I think, again, it's just kind of that mindset that you have with your business and just kind of an ownership to just make sure you're thorough in your communication, but also detailed in the game plan, knowing that nobody benefits unless the loan gets to the finish line, and that there's alignment for not only our consumers, but our referral partners, all the people working on the deal, that, we're all collectively trying to get this to the end of the line. So that would be my 2 cents as well.
Love it. Like we have a saying here, help everyone home. And that's always something that we always need to sometimes take a step back and realize at the end of the day, it's a client who is trying to close on their home, whether they're refinancing it or they're trying to buy it, or the greatest scenario when you're getting a first time home buyer into their house. Like that's the key. Yes, there's going to be hiccups. Yes, there's going to be a lot of work that goes into it. But at the end of the day, knowing that you've put somebody into a home safely and securely, it's a great feeling. Something Aram
Amen.
touched on too is utilizing everybody and bouncing ideas and sharing information. I mentioned to you guys before the show started, I tell all my partners, it's no longer about what I know, it's more about who I know, because situations like this are going to come up and I might not have the answer. And it's great that I can rely on other crew directors here at Rocket or my own crew and bounce something off them and say, has anybody seen this before? What do we do when we've got a Tesla lean? And knowing that, yes, there's an outcome that is a lot easier than, faxing or waiting for Tesla to get back to you, or crossing your fingers and that the document is going to appear. There, you can send them to the website and get them, the information they need.
Yeah.
So now that we've identified where and why things break down, let's shift and see what we should be looking for before it becomes a problem.
Sure.
So what early warning signs should brokers pay closer attention to, in your opinion?
Good question. I think I go back to kind of mindset, and it's this kind of mentality of being able to take a fine-tooth comb through the file itself. And there's always like a clear point in the transaction where the commitments, yes, we're agreed we're moving forward, whether it's a purchase or a refinance, that I put on my originator hat and I tell the client, hey, I'm going to shift the tone of the conversation because the next steps are the most important part. I want to be as thorough as possible to make sure we don't run into these snags into the process itself. And I really make sure I'm diligent in taking that application. People might have a different way of running that initial profile call, discovering the client's goals. But when the time comes to take the next step and get the file into underwriting, I'm trying to be as detailed as possible and really make sure I have accurate contact information for employers. I have accurate address history, just the basics, right? Secondly is just using resources. And I think there's this kind of concept between knowledge and wisdom is just learned through experience. And Aram will talk about this on this call, which is kind of like building your mental Rolodex of past problems that have arose and just trying to kind of like scan for potential red flags. I think an awesome resource we use often is the SOS hotline, where we can call an underwriter and talk out a scenario and say, hey, here's my concern. How do I structure this? Or is this going to be a problem in process? And just trying to do our due diligence up front to make sure that, we have a game plan and we've had these conversations up front. And then lastly, it's just kind of like scanning once you've completed that product at potential things that can go sideways. And examples of that I mentioned earlier are ratios, right? Like if I know we're at 79.9% loan to value and the only way this file works is if we can consolidate all debt, gosh, I want to be as thorough as possible at verifying my comps and the value that the client's suggesting that their home is worth. Same with income. And, if something could break, having that conversation up front to just communicate what potential bottlenecks we could run into, just so everyone's on the same page, and trying to make sure that as we communicate these things, we keep it as simple as possible so it's digestible for the consumer. Aram, anything that you can think of?
Yeah, I think there's like steps to like just build out within your process to ensure that not everything's just a mental Rolodex of, fine points that we have, but also things that you check for prior to a submission. Internally, we run a team. So sometimes, we have a diverse group of loan officers. I'm like, can we get them doing things as similarly as possible? So if it's Sean or I checking it, we have exactly where we can go to. So it doesn't differ from loan officer to loan officer when it comes to the structure of what we need prior to submitting the loan to process, whether it's in our LOS or POS, putting notes down like, hey, here's the IPAC, here's the income, property, assets, and credit. This is what it looks like. This is what we're doing for the client. I pop in, I'm able to look. And then I'm like, okay, this looks pretty good. Let me go back in and verify inside of their 1003. And then just recognizing patterns internally when it comes to your workforce. I think if you're running a team whose quality of submissions are superior to other folks and what are they missing? Can we get them as close to possible to mimic that? Some of it's a personality trait. For myself, I got a ton of experience, so I just know that there's certain things I'm just checking for to make sure that I can't completely pass on. But if we have the mentality of each one teach one when it comes to certain scenarios, then maybe they pick it up. And maybe they just, put this back in the back of their mind, and now they have it for any time in the future. But a lot of it has to do with the process that you have in place to not only prevent future things, but also for your scaling of your business, which is what Sean and I are looking for, and then protecting our pipeline going forward so we can continue to be on the front end of prospecting for new business.
I love that. I'm stealing the each one teach one from you, Aram. That was fantastic. That will be in my next team huddle. And speaking of team, I think if my crew heard what you guys just said, they'd be in line right now to give you guys some high fives. That's the number one underwriting pet peeve, is set up loans that just don't add up quite right. Like you mentioned employment. Chances are not every one of your applications started their job on June 23rd, 2024, right? It just happens to be exactly 2 years, and that should work, right? But
New
rest
year, new
assured,
me.
in process, we're going to get a VOE, and we're going to find out that they actually started in August of 2024, and now overtime and bonus income might be in jeopardy. So getting that information right up front so that we know how to proactively condition a loan definitely makes for a smoother process.
I learned this from I don't know if it was Bill Emerson, but if someone's struggling to submit loans and they're struggling month to month on their business, the likelihood of them making mistakes on their next submission drastically goes up. So if you have a real pulse on your business and understand, hey, Sean's submitting 10 loans a month, he's probably pulling through at 80%. Things are moving along. Maybe he's not the person that requires me to be completely in detail of his pipeline. But Aram, he's only submitting 1 or 2 loans a month. Let's make sure he has a double checkpoints along with what we already said, maybe that second set of eyes, and he has immediate leadership looking at his loans before submission, because the likelihood of him making a mistake on the submission goes up in comparison to the person that's doing some significant amount of business, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So now, once you start catching those signals early and building in the checks and balances, the next step is preventing it, right?
Yep.
Correct.
So how can brokers like yourselves and all those out there listening improve communication across their borrowers and agents and lending partners?
Yeah, I go back kind of the internal external theme, and I think it starts with the things that we can control. And to Ram's point, and kind of what we try to do here within Forever American at the FAM is just kind of have like a quality assurance checklist. So one thing I suggest all brokers doing is some sort of app flow questions outside of just what's required on the 1003 and your declarations. We often will kind of have our own set of questions that go a little bit deeper from a property condition standpoint to common things that can cause the loan to go sideways. And I think that's something that's easily something you can add to the business with a little lift and just get ahead of stuff before it becomes a problem, like the chipped and peeling paint on an FHA deal, right? Not a common question that you might ask until it becomes a problem, but something easy to prevent if you're having those questions brought early. And just recognizing, like you said, Craig, that, the underwriter is not having a direct conversation with the client. They haven't had that rapport and heard the story. So as an originator, our job is to tell this story, and we have to be thorough in how we tell it and just make sure that the June 23, 2024 is not the start date, and just making sure that, message sent is message received.
Absolutely. Aram, anything you want to add?
No, that's good points that Sean brought up.
For sure. I mean, it's clear. Strong communication is going to just create a much better foundation, but it's the systems behind it that prevent surprises, right?
Yeah.
So what systems or processes are you using to help reduce last minute surprises?
Well, I talked a little about the internal, which was kind of the checks and balances to how to take the application, kind of have that mindset of working from the finish line backwards. But I think the external is the communication side. And regardless if you're doing a lot of purchase business, refinance business, hybrid, a little bit of both, I think setting kind of a cadence for your communication helps structure your business and keep it on track so you're not super reactive. Clients all prefer different forms of communication, and we kind of call them the air, land, and sea, which is phone calls, text messages, and emails. And just understanding first and foremost, like how is communication going to be delivered? And then also just being proactive in telling them how you're going to communicate and when you're going to communicate. We kind of have, I guess, a barometer here if we're being proactive in our communication by just auditing when's the last time someone had to ask me for a status update. And I think if that does occur, someone has to say, hey, what's going on? Where are we at? You failed, right? And, in my experience and in my tenure, the imagination of an agent or a client consumer is probably far worse than reality. And a lot of the times people want to wait until they have the good news to communicate and they kind of just keep things on ice. But I promise it just builds a lot of anxiety and anticipation, and they're just kind of left figuring out what's going on. So figure out your cadence, understand, at the beginning of the process, how you're going to communicate. Often we'll say, hey, we're going to check in every Tuesday, regardless of what's going on. And then from, the technology side, everyone operates in different loan origination softwares, but it's wise to kind of set triggers up to have some sort of automation going out. So as milestones get completed within our ecosystem, it just sends automated emails. They're just easy status updates that just kind of show, hey, your appraisal was ordered, or it's been received, or title work's been complete. Just things that we can do so parties that are invested in the transaction can see, hey, progress is being made. And I think all those collectively just have kind of a formal game plan where everyone's on the same page and kind of expecting what's going to happen next. And then I guess the last thing is just kind of foreshadowing and educating consumers and agents, how the process works and what to anticipate. So we often, when we start the underwriting process, have kind of what we would consider, a pre-underwriting phone call, which is kind of a feel-good call. These are exciting calls to make because it's a milestone that you've accomplished, and you kind of set the stage of just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Here is each milestone that we're going to accomplish. Here's what happens. Here's what to expect. And by the end of it, everyone just feels like, okay, like I know what's going on and I can rest easy because these guys have my back and we're going to get to the finish line.
Excellent. And I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up some of our own tools. We use them both inside, and I know they're used outside. I think Aram, you touched on it even yesterday when we were speaking. Things like SOS and Pathfinder, leaning on some of the things that are offered through our own portal to help you guys get set up, make sure that the loan is going to be a success, down the line too. So, is that something that you are actively working with your loan officers on, or something you're using regularly on your own?
We try to make sure that we're not always just answering the question. It's so easy to just come to us and we give the answer. A lot of times we want to point them in that direction for them to be a little bit more resourceful. Hey, have you called SOS? Have you asked? I was like, I think we can do this, but before I give you an answer, can you call them and make sure? Have you looked at Pathfinder? Have you looked at Max debt to income on Refi Plus? I think this could work. And those are the ways I learned early on. We had Pathfinder, and I think it was called something else back then, but it was a way for me to
Grapevine.
Yeah, it was Guru. It was Guru, and it was a way for me. If I was working on a Saturday and my director wasn't there or whoever wasn't there to help me out, for me to be a little bit more resourceful in finding solutions for my business. And it's something we try to coach to. Ultimately, that gives you the most amount of longevity in your career. Sean likes to say it gives people agency. They believe they can fix things on their own and get things done. And when you think you can do things on your own, guess what happens? You might work a little longer. You might take an extra call. You might have that confidence that you're the one that's going to figure out the solution, which I think in and of itself it's inherently heard or felt when you're on the phone with a client. Like, oh, I got the right guy here, or I was going to figure it out, right? Or Sean's going to figure it out. And that's the type of ownership we want to give people. So those tools are amazing. I don't think there's any other place you can get those at your fingertips in that fashion when it comes to originating loans. So yeah, we're big, huge fans, and it's actually part of our process. So, and that's the stuff that, you start to document to make sure, hey, have you done this first before you went to look for another solution?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, teach a man to fish, right? We practice the same thing on our side. Underwriters come to us with questions all the time too, but it's the same thing. Like, how far have you dug? Is there, what are your thoughts on it? Because I might not have any idea either, but as we talk through it and you've already done some of that digging yourselves, now we have a path that we can go on. That's why we call it Pathfinder, right? And we can get some answers and hopefully build a solution that's going to suit the client's needs.
Yeah, and I
So,
think Aram, just one last comment, it mentioned it too, like just in this role, you have to have high agency. And I think humility as well, is we don't have all the answers. Guidelines are constantly changing, new products are being brought to the marketplace. And I think, early in your career, it's maybe a level of imposter syndrome where you feel like you need to kind of have all these answers, at your fingertips. But in my experience, it's absolutely okay to say, hey, that's a great question. Let me get back to you on that. And nowadays, with the tools, the language models, the stuff that you have integrated into Rocket, it's very easy to kind of have that teach a man to fish versus give a man a fish mentality where it's saying, hey, like with agency, I can paraphrase the question that I'm trying to figure out. And if I'm resourceful, I can probably find that answer. So I think, also being okay with not having the answer and knowing that we're in the era of information. So you have easy access to find it if you don't know it.
right. And then the follow through is going to win every time.
Otherwise, we
So,
become a hub of being the Pied Piper, and they're just always wanting to be at your desk asking you everything, or just like, hey, the answers are here. You just gotta want to do it.
right. So when those habits start to become consistent, you move from reacting to issues to running a more controlled, scalable operation. How can brokers build a scalable operation workflow?
I think it starts with defining your process. And everyone's business is different, their audience is different. But I think at its core, you got to start as simple as, do I have a process? Um, from there, you want to kind of build out the workflows that are repeatable. Like you can't measure the bottleneck of a process unless it's defined, and you can't figure out where things break unless there's consistency. Or Ram hears me say it all the time. I call it a catchphrase at this point, but consistency compounds. So you have to kind of have your flow and structured checkpoints, right? Like if I was saying earlier, you don't have that game plan that's foreshadowed and there's not structure, you're just bar fighting. You don't own the day. You're just reactive to kind of gets thrown your way. And it's really hard to scale your business when you're working on everyone else's schedules, and there's times in this business that we can't control the reactivity. We just got to dive on the grenade, and that's always going to exist. But by doing the other things, having the process built in place, creating a workflow, being consistent, you have a lot more ownership of how you structure your day and when you decide to work on things. And, there's that difference between kind of important and urgent. And I feel like without the process defined, everything feels urgent. Everything's reactive. But when you kind of start implementing those checks and balances, that system that you can kind of follow as guardrails, then you can start saying, okay, like that's important, but not necessarily urgent. And I'm going to earmark it and get to it when I have some free time later in the day.
Very true. Very true. And as co-founders of your own company, obviously, you're looking, it's not just one deal. You have to be looking at across every deal and across your entire floor and all their pipelines as well. So being able to kind of build that into their mindset that it's not just this one loan. Everything you do on this loan is repeatable. You can build it to scale and carry on everything you learn into the next loan. So that's huge. How do brokers create a smoother experience without adding more operational chaos?
Um, I just like to have a standardized process, and Sean and I, and be as simple as possible. We're also looking long term and not like short term duct tape solutions. So one of the biggest things is like we standardize milestone updates to keep all parties involved. So that was built out by Sean in our LOS. All of a sudden, client gets a milestone, move to conditional approval, boom, they got communication. And now, as a loan officer, we always say, hey, we get this automated, and now let's just follow it up with a touch that's a little bit more personal. They got this no matter what, but can you say, hey, I hope you got that email to Ram. We're conditionally approved. Congratulations. We'll go work through these conditions and try to get you to the finish line here shortly. And all of a sudden you have an extra touch point, and it's immediate because they understand that this is going to be automated at certain points. And now you just got to follow up with a human action. So you use the automation strategically. It's not like overwhelming. It's not 10 different automated emails where then it becomes like you're crying wolf and you're just not getting the traction you want when it should be like maybe 4 cases. Submission, conditional approval, resubmission, clear to close, and maybe an update in between there with an appraisal. But that, we're already ordering it. The client's paying an appraisal deposit. So that gets done a little differently. But now we only have 4 pieces that get touched on immediately, and we know it's going to go out. It makes that standardized pretty, like I said, very simple. It ensures that expectations are kind of built into the workflow and not handled, like Sean says, in a bar fight. It's, oh, yeah, you are at conditional approval. And all of a sudden, you're just like reactionary instead of, hey, these are the checkpoints. This has been built out. This will keep your pipeline running smoothly outside of anything unforeseen that we can't really control. We know this we can control. You're getting the client an update. This is what's happening next. This happens at resubmission. This happens with our processor and the processor's touching points. One thing that's built out is immediately at submission, we introduce the processor by name via text as a group chat, and then that goes out immediately. Hey, Craig, this is Aram and Sean. He's my processor. He's working on the loan with us. Anything he asks for, it's like I'm asking for it. He's going to help us get to the finish line. So please, return it in a timely fashion. Boom, that communication goes out immediately up front, and everyone does it. So now when Sean and I are reviewing something or reviewing our own business, we understand that that checkpoint was made. There's no reason this client shouldn't be sending Sean the documents, right? So it's really about building out that workflow and ensuring it gets executed on. And that's what allows you to define like consistently where we're going and also for the foreseeable future, what we're looking like when this scales out. We can do it at 15 loan officers. Can we do it at 25? Can I do it at 2? And et cetera.
I would say one thing that's a best practice that's been a real big impact maker in my career is this simple note that I leave. And this is for pre-underwriting, during underwriting, and it's this kind of concept of let my present self think for my future self. When you're working with multiple deals, it's so hard to kind of have the memory to understand where every single thing is at on all these unique timelines. And the note is simple. It's this concept of WN question mark, and it's an acronym for what's next. And it's this idea that, hey, if I can communicate to future Sean when I get back into this file, where am I picking up from what I left off last? And a lot of this stuff, like we talked about in the beginning of this call, are timelines out of our control. Like I'm waiting for the WVOE to come back, or I'm waiting for the appraisal, or I sent a request to the consumer because he needs to get me his year-end pay stub. And I'll just leave that quick note when I'm fresh in the file and know exactly what's going on. And what it's allowed me to do is significantly cut down my speed to contact. Because by the next time I touch that file, I have the note from former Sean that says, hey, this is what you're waiting on. This is what you did last. Here's what you're doing next. So I think one of the best practices I could suggest is kind of implementing something similar to your own business. And it's super helpful, even pre-underwriting, when you're still prospecting with clients, to kind of just leave off what was the last summary of the conversation? Where did you guys last leave off? And what's that next conversation going to sound like? So it just kind of streamlines the communication where I can dive right into the file and be like, okay, this is where I'm picking up from.
Perfect. I mean, this is really like the best part of my job is having conversations like this and kind of seeing how things work on the outside of our world, and everything's very formulaic here. We come in and we're working through loans, through a pipeline, but outside we know like there's different challenges and how you approach them and what you do on your business is really cool to kind of get that inside view. So thank you guys so much for sharing. I'm going to try to do my best and recap all of this for the folks at home, and feel free to interject and add on here as we go. But hopefully, like we said, you were able to identify common pipeline risks and breakdown points in the loan process. We've explained how communication gaps and workflow issues impact real outcomes. We can now apply some strategies to reduce operational friction and last-minute surprises, and most importantly, build cleaner workflows that protect the client experience and their pipeline. So guys, like I'll let you kind of break it down from here. What are your main 3 takeaways that you want to make sure that everybody at home hears?
I think if we could leave you guys with anything, it's like I said first, you got to have a process in place, and that's going to be unique to the individual. But you should really try to think as you're defining that process of internal and external, right? Internal, we can control That's, our due diligence as loan originators to tell the story accurately on the 1003, figuring out proactively what could be required prior to the finish line and getting that as early as possible. And then external of just being able to set those proper expectations and truly kind of live that brand that a lot of us probably use, being, under promise and over deliver with strong foreshadows. And just make sure you stay consistent to what you've documented and defined as that plan, and always be building that mental kind of Rolodex of stuff that does become an issue, and audit that plan and say, hey, could I prevented this? Did this fire prevent another fire in the future? Because now I know how to solve it. And then kind of adding that. So it should be a living document that's ever changing as, you experience more and more reps inside of this industry. Two, I think just having that measure twice, cut once mentality. We've said it earlier on the call, and nobody wins unless everybody gets to the finish line. So be as thorough as possible. I think it's exciting to get a loan submitted to underwriting, but I much rather wait a day or two to try to get as much stuff up front as possible, because nothing feels better than a super clean conditional approval. Nothing gets you more referrals by calling the consumer and letting them know there's nothing needed on their end and you're just waiting for services to be complete. And then, the three is simple and self-explanatory. It's execute your process, like have that agency and make sure that once you define the process and, you're staying consistent too, execute. I think that the easy way to have a force multiplier in your business is give an incredible, streamlined, efficient process. And luckily, comparative to other investors that brokers have access to, Rocket's one of the most, right? You guys have a really, really smooth closing process. You have an easy portal to navigate, and nothing gets you more deals than speed. I think in the tenure I've had, when that client's like, wow, that was it, we're done already. That's just what the person thinks of when the transaction's over. And, when their colleagues are asking about a mortgage, they're so quick to throw your name in the hat because they're like, man, that was easy. I always think of that Staples commercial with the red button, or you click it and that was easy. Like, that's the mentality I want to have. So that would be my parting wisdom. And Aram, I'll pass it to you to have anything that you want to add.
No, thanks for going over that, Sean. It's just those three items. You define and document, you measure twice, cut once, and execute your process. I think the single most important thing is to execute whatever you put forward as a plan. Because then once you execute, you can see the fruits of your labor thereafter. Otherwise, it's just an idea, and you get nowhere with it. Just convolutes what you're trying to do instead of facilitating that executable that gets you to the finish line a little quicker.
Right. And if they get to pound that easy button at the end, then everybody wins. Because like you said, the speed of the game has changed so much. The three of us have been around a while. Closing a loan was 30, 45 days. Now we're doing them in 10, 15 days. Mm-hmm. So if you can take the most stressful financial obligation that somebody's going to have and get it down to a week or 10 days, and have them tell you at the end that, wow, that was really easy and I didn't expect it to go as fast as it did, then you won. You won a client for life, and hopefully you've won some referrals along the way too. So thank you guys so much for coming to this and joining us today. Wanted to get a shout out for the next pro performance in the series. That's going to be happening on July 9th. And so stay tuned to all the Rocket Pro websites. You'll be seeing updates for that one. And you'll get some more competitive edges along the way. So again, thank you all for joining us today. We can kind of close things out. For me, Craig Pochert, Crew Director here at Rocket. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing, and we definitely appreciate all that you did for us today.
Thanks for having us.